After the results just before the international fixture and about 8 games into the Premier League season, you can begin to look at the shape of the Premier League table. And I'm not saying, therefore, that everyone is solidified where they are, but the way that things are shaping up is interesting. And people are asking the question, do we have a title race on our hands? Over previous years, we've all asked this question, and many times it's been a 2-horse race. And in fact, the assumption this year was that it would be these two who would be the horses. But here, I have a small flock. Is it a flock? What do you call it? Like a set? What is a group of horses called? What do you call a group of horses? A band, a herd, a stud, a stable. Here we have a small stable of people. Manchester United are in there. That is because they will be influential at some point this season, whether they get over their phobia of winning or not. Not that, they seem scared of it. Anyway, over the previous years, we've obviously seen that at this point, the Premier League table is not necessarily indicative of where it is going come the end of the season. Man City and Pep Guardiola have such shape-shifting powers and such inevitability about them that in the end, they're always there or thereabouts. Of course, we can go down the Premier League table, though, and show that that's not always been the case, not always been as close as possible. Last season, obviously, Arsenal dropped off towards the end, Manchester United began to catch up, Liverpool were well off the title race, but it was the second half of the season that indicates possibly where they're going to go this season. And Newcastle United were definitely performing better than they are right now. In fact, if you extrapolate out where their points total is right now, they will finish below 71 points. But again, we probably didn't expect them to finish on 71 points before. Previous seasons before that, Liverpool lose out by 1 point. Chelsea well off the pace. That's a 2-horse race. Liverpool win by 18 points. This is a season where Man City were essentially having a fallow season. That's where they kind of take a bit of time off, but they don't really take a bit of time off. But they're still competitive because they're better than everyone else, but they're still not competitive as Liverpool were. And Liverpool absolutely, they walloped the whole league apart from Watford that season. And then, of course, there was this season, the infamous Jose Mourinho season, one where he calls it one of his greatest achievements to finish 12 points off the top, but to finish second to Man City. A huge part of that, by the way, and a huge part of a lot of these seasons is the results that teams get in between each other. So let's talk a little bit about that. But let's also talk about the game state idea, and also just the state of where things are. There is a big difference when you, I can't do this, it's PNG. State. What is your state right now? Because I feel that a lot of titles on YouTube currently rely on state. Are Liverpool Premier League title contenders? Are Manchester United falling away? Are Chelsea this? Are Spurs that? It's defining where people are, and that definition can sometimes be dangerous because I would say that a lot of Man City states temporary. There are permanent elements of them, but if we scroll down to this guy, he's a more permanent element than a temporary loss. And a lot of people obviously want to be a little bit more tabloidy and kind of make it almost awkward just in order to get a good video. Take the temporary state and make it feel permanent. They make it feel as if Pep Guardiola has dropped off, as if Pep Guardiola's lost to Arsenal is that a permanent state. In the moment, it feels that way, but it isn't necessarily that way. Remember this face. Remember how much these guys competed for last season. This is him winning the Champions League trophy. This is a guy who's so key to all of that. This is a guy who makes those games more difficult. But it's then what leads me on to something else that you can kind of judge where teams are at this point, right? This, weirdly, right, is, actually I'll go down, where is it? It is that. This is the set of fixtures after the international break. We can glut the season up, right? We can kind of put them all together and get us to a point where you basically go, okay, who's going to have a difficult run? Who's going to have a relatively simple run? And who is the difficult run? What's weird about it is, you can kind of tell how strong or weak a team is in the Premier League based on the colour. Green obviously means that feels like a relatively simple fixture. Grey is one of those kind of more neutral ones. And the very deep red, and the red, very deep red is City, that's only City. Red is Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal. Weirdly, they put Manchester United in that, but I don't know how they're judging that. The point is, Manchester United are difficult to play at the very top level, so it would still make it difficult. I don't know how they're doing this matchup, but I still just wanted to highlight this for a second, right? What we have here is, and you can see, post-international break, everyone predict, and here's what I'm actually trying to say about this table, right? This isn't necessarily a scientific thing, but it's a narrative thing, and I think a lot of this table seems narrative-driven, right? Liverpool's narrative with Everton. Saying Everton are an easy game in a Merseyside derby doesn't make any sense to me. Saying that Forest are an easy game after what they tried to do to Liverpool last season. Saying Luton away is an easy game is not necessarily true. Brentford at home, you could say, is probably feel neutral, but Brentford are a very decent side, and we know what Brentford have done to a couple of other people this season. In fact, we know that they're capable of competing with Liverpool because tactically they're good at mismatching. That's followed by Man City. In between all of these, of course, are Europa League and Champions League games, depending on the team. You've got Fulham at home, Sheffield United away. Like, that run for Liverpool is highlighted as easy, but realistically, is it really that? What is it that makes, on the surface, these things are easy, right? In the same way with Man City, right? They think Manchester United is difficult. I wonder if that's a turning point for Manchester United, but you get my point. Liverpool at home, obviously difficult. There are a lot of interesting facts in here. Manchester United apparently have a very easy run post-international game, apart from City and Newcastle. They have Fulham, Luton, Everton, Chelsea, Sheffield United. What I'm saying is there are lots of games and there are certain teams that are capable and certain teams that are not capable in this small stable of teams of putting runs together. Liverpool, we know are capable. Man City, we know are capable. And in fact, what's interesting with Liverpool, especially if we look at the game state idea here of what's permanent, what's temporary, what feels very permanent for Liverpool right now is the fact they lost out on those 3 points to Spurs. In fact, if they hadn't have lost out on those 3 points, Spurs, say they drew, Spurs would be on 18 points right now. Liverpool would also be equal with that on 18 points. Say that Liverpool had gone on to win and the Diaz goal had counted, Liverpool would be top of the league. How does that impact the mentality? You could see it impacting Liverpool just the other day in terms of the way that they approached the game. There was a lot less rebuttal to the referee. There was a lot more getting on with it. Is it a way of making your team bond around you, or is it a way of demoralising a side and making sure that they don't ultimately benefit from what was probably one of the worst set of decisions we've seen in the Premier League? Spurs coming together right now, but early on, of course, a lot of people haven't faced a system like Ange Ball. As we move on through the Premier League season, more and more people are going to identify trends. As soon as Ange and his team, which I kind of want to go down to here, there. So Spurs post-international break, it's kind of interesting to look at here, right? Like, I feel like you might see that Palace, Chelsea, Wolves, Villa, highlighted as easy, but actually games, especially with the likes of Spurs and those guys, that you've got tactical managers who will want to try and unlock Ange, who want to try and get in behind those guys, who, you've got a Chelsea, you've got a Pochettino derby there, you've got a London derby there. You've got, again, a London derby there. You've got Wolves, who are difficult to face. I get it, but you still get what I'm saying here. And then you've got a team like Aston Villa, followed by Manchester City, followed by West Ham. There's a lot of sides who don't really fall into an easy or hard category this season. In fact, West Ham find themselves high up. Brighton find themselves high up. Palace find themselves higher than both Chelsea and Manchester. This is my point here. It's about the balance of what is the difficulty? How are they making matches more difficult? And what I find interesting again is, and I'll go back to it, the difference between temporary and permanent. I can't double click that. Temporary is the state which we find ourselves in, say, post-match with Arsenal and Man City. Arsenal, Man City, they both played pretty much a stalemate game, but a lot of it was as John and the rest of the guys at John McKenzie and the rest of the guys at TIFO have identified. Out of possession versus in possession was so key in this game. The possession, they kept passing it back and forward. Before that, you kind of see City dominated possession more often than not. Arsenal used possession much more effectively. There was kind of this game state need to adapt on the fly. And what Arteta and Pep were doing was kind of clashing over their tiny little tweaks, the little matchups they were trying to exploit. And ultimately, Arsenal came out on top of that. It was a fantastic moment for Arsenal, fantastic freeing moment. We can talk about the tactics of that. We can talk about the tactics and the implications of but actually is a huge impact there, just the fact that Arsenal feel like they've mentally moved on from needing to do something like that. Do you get what I'm saying? I mean, every season they have these kind of small jumps, and every team has these little hurdles they need to get over. This was another one for Arsenal. Does it spur them on, especially in the Premier League? And then the more permanent, I can't do that, the permanent idea of, well, Arsenal and City are not going to play in kind of an type game every week, out of possession, every week, because not every team can play that style of football. Not every team wants to do their matchups in the same way. This was the exception to the rule rather than the rule. And a lot of people, I think, are looking for this overarching narrative right now of hey, Arsenal played this possessional game against Man City and they were gritty and whatever it is. Sure, I think there are elements we can take away from that where it's like, they were gritty, they were dedicated, but that's not going to require the same level of focus every game, and it's not easy to get that level of focus. What I find interesting about that is, if we go down to these kind of difficulty charts, are you going to get the same level of focus for Arsenal in a game like a game against Sheffield United, maybe Burnley, maybe Luton? Luton away is hard, man. Like, what I'm really saying here is, these factors that we keep judging these teams on, the temporary states we're making more permanent. And when you look at the longer plotting of how hard or easy or, the scale in between that all of these are, it's not about just going, we'll beat them easily, we'll beat them less comfortably. What I'm really trying to get at here is there is a title race on, and it's partially because, especially if you look at Man City's recent results, the fact that Man City, A, missed Rodri, which is a temporary thing rather than a permanent thing, and B, really they were exploited in a number of different areas where other managers will be able to get at that. Rodri is a huge part of this. Rodri is possibly the best defensive midfielder in the world right now, and he plays that role in such a commanding way. He controls the game in the way that Pep Guardiola wants to control the game. He doesn't even really need to be a defensive midfielder. He is someone who is marshalling, not in the way that a Virgil van Dijk would or a Henderson would, though he is obviously a good leader. But you get my point. Like, without Rodri, City look a very different prospect. But the point is, they will have Rodri back. If they had Rodri in this game, what did he do against Declan Rice? Declan Rice wasn't exactly, I think Declan Rice has some very good games. I think we can just overstate at the moment and maybe also underestimate where Declan Rice is at. A lot of people are either looking for one end of the scale or the other, looking for a terrible game from Declan or an incredible game from him, a commanding performance. At the moment, and especially as so many of these teams, this team, all of them are trying to be more than the sum of their parts, a collective which adds more to those other people. And that sometimes means sacrificing your own brilliant levels of performance, which maybe Declan Rice will have had at West Ham, for everything else. Now within that, what Pep Guardiola has managed to do is get excellence and maximum performance from some of these players. What I thought was fascinating was they started the game with Lewis in midfield, and later on, they brought on a Stones and a Núñez. Starting with Kovacic and Lewis is a very different game state to Núñez and Stones, or wherever you think Stones fits into this side, right? But those two players are incredibly controlling. It's easy to underestimate those guys. It's easy to think, well, these aren't game-changing substitutions. Bringing Núñez and Stones on completely changes the shape of that midfield. Pep lost to a narrow loss here. Like, it's not like Arsenal dominated them. And you know what? It doesn't even matter really if Arsenal dominated or not. It's about the end result in these big games, which is going to shift balance come the end of the season. Who's capable in this cluster here of putting a run of games together that really just demoralises the opposition and says, hey, look, there's 8 points difference between us now. That's 3 wins essentially for you and 3 losses for us. Or, a series of draws, whatever you want to call it. Newcastle United. I think they still have a big role to play in this title race, and I think they will still play a big role in this title race, as I think will Chelsea, as I think will Spurs, as I think will Manchester United. But the main 3 that I pick out here are Man City, Arsenal, and Liverpool. The reason I picked these 3 out is because all 3 of them seem to have a very strong identity. There is the formation of identity down here, and maybe Ange is getting in a place, especially without Champions League football, where Spurs can grow very, very quickly. They do an Arsenal of the previous seasons when Arteta didn't necessarily have all those, the big run of games. Chelsea similarly won't have that big run of games. They'll give them time to put something together, but I can't see them putting a run of games together and closing that gap from 11 points. It's basically 9 points different. Manchester United, too much crisis right now at the club, too much difficulty going around. I get it. I think Erik ten Hag is the man for this club, but I don't necessarily think that therefore he's going to take them to a title this season. People will begin to get impatient. Players will begin to get angry. And then let's go and talk about Newcastle United just for a second. They sit in 8th at the moment. The win against PSG is a huge headline. They're only 4 points off Liverpool, right? So they're not necessarily out of the top 4 race, but I think already we can discount them out of the title race. Because they don't have the personnel. They don't have the depth within the squad. There is the beginning of depth. There is the beginning of quality. But once you get beyond that, starting 11, it becomes a lot more difficult. The cumulative sum of their parts means that takes them out of certain elements of just long competition. And also, I get it, Eddie Howe finished the season rather strong, but he had a little dip. We still need to see that Eddie Howe is capable of managing teams without an incredible dip at some point in the season. And that's what leaves these guys, Man City, at the very, not even at the very top of the table, but basically breathing down the necks of both Spurs and Arsenal. They're within touching distance. They're within one game. And being within one game is all that matters, which is why, realistically, it's Liverpool up, but it could also be counted as Villa up, Brighton up. You get what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying that Villa and Brighton are in the title race. What I am saying is they're taking enough points. They're breathing down other people's necks. They are demoralizing people on a weekly basis now, to the point where people basically can't cope with just the sheer volume of games that people have in there. The volume and the competition is now much higher in the league. If you go look at the table from top to bottom, or even if you just look at this alphabetically organized, which one is it? Are you going to be neutral, Lawrence, if you have a Liverpool shirt mug? Probably not. Who here has an easy run? The answer is nobody. But the point is, can you class Arsenal as easy? Can you class Villa as easy? No. Bournemouth at a push. Brentford? No. Brighton? No. Burnley at a push. Chelsea? No. Palace? No. Everton at a push. Fulham at a light push. Liverpool, I mean, even then, Fulham are a good side. Liverpool, Luton, even at a push. Man City, Manchester United, no. Newcastle, no. Forest, no. Sheffield United at a push. Spurs, West Ham, no. Wolves just beat Man City a couple of weeks ago. I'm saying there is such diversity within this league now that this table, this idea of a strong team versus something else, is negated, and the Arsenal-Man City game is a perfect example of why this table negates that. And the reason being, you can lock people down into a stalemate. That's a huge part of it, right? The other side of it is, now competing in a game like this is not just about are we better than you or not. It is now about, are we matching you up in certain parts of the field? Are you able to cancel out a lot of the positives that we're trying to do? Does your sitting deep cancel out a lot of the other elements that we're trying to impose on our own game? Yes, 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 and yes, right? What I'm saying is there is a lot of the season still to go. We're a quarter of the way through, and this Premier League table is looking very promising at the moment for a couple of sides. It clearly shows that Liverpool are in a different state to where they were before. They were so off the pace before at the beginning of last season. It clearly shows that Arsenal and Spurs are in different or improved states. What's weird is, and now we'll talk about this narrative versus reality, temporary versus permanent. The narrative is temporary, the results are permanent. Arsenal are on the same number of points as Tottenham. They essentially sit joint top. Goals for, they've scored less, but goals against, they've also conceded less. They're on exactly the same number of points. But look at the narrative difference. Look at the narrative difference between Liverpool and City. Look at the narrative difference between Liverpool and Villa. These sides are all within the same band of teams. They are, and really it's that. But you get my point. Like, there is something here that I think Liverpool, Arsenal and Spurs can all take heart from, and what they probably aren't listening to on the Twitter sphere or the X sphere or the YouTube sphere is the narrative. They know there is permanence to these results, and that is why I think it's interesting to look at the top of the table here. Arsenal, there seems to be a more negative vibe about, and I've seen TDK just kind of discussing a similar thing. Spurs seem to be on the up. Arsenal, because it feels like a plateau, are more like that and beginning to feel like a plateau. You don't know where Spurs' ceiling is right now. They will find it after this international break. I'm not saying they're going to get worse. I'm just saying there will be a ceiling at some point. Go. These are relatively simple games, but you get what I'm saying. It's really interesting to chat to you guys. I'd love to know who you think is going to go where. I'm going to do breakdowns individually of the likes of Liverpool, but I just thought it was good to talk about the overall narrative. When people are evaluating teams, what are they really evaluating? What are they really looking for? What are they really looking at? And who are they really clickbaiting? Let me know in the comments below who you think is really in a title race. Is this stable wide enough? Is this, are we being unfair to Manchester United at this point? Are we being unfair to Erik ten Hag? Can Erik ten Hag turn this around? It's interesting to know. I'd love to know what you guys think. Get at me in the comments below. I'll be down there to chat to you guys as well. Click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Put a thumbs up on this video, please, because it really helps the channel. And I'll chat to you again in a while. Much love.